Okay, here's the newest Craigslist find. It's a Husqvarna 55 Rancher. It does not run currently. The story is that it's had a cylinder and piston replaced already, and that fixed it. It ran for a while, and then the last time the previous owner got it out, it just didn't run. It does turn over. Feels like good compression, but I don't really know much more than that. So time to take it apart, clean it up, figure out what it needs. I've never seen this air filter before. It's really just more like a screen. Kind of cool, new to me. And here's part of an intake gasket, just chilling in the bottom here. And I guess I should check it for fuel. It has no fuel. Well, that's one reason. There's also no fuel pickup filter. It's just a tube. So I think we already know one of the major problems. So let's see if it runs when there's fuel added to it. Gonna need some starter work at least. Trying to work out how the choke works on this. I guess when you press the choke button on this cover, all you're doing is moving this tab forward, and that is actually just pushing this in to close off the intake opening. That's actually quite clever, but I don't know how reliable it is. Okay, now I can choke it, assuming that that tab really is pushing in far enough. This seems futile. I'll bet that intake hose is clogged. Okay, spark plug is beautiful and new, but dry. My guess is fuel restriction. Let's take a compression reading. So for this, I need to pull the decompression valve out. So this is going to be good and hard to pull. Ooh. Feels harder than the meter reads. Okay, and we're reading right at 150. So that's great. Got lots of compression in the saw. If we just dribble a little bit of fuel down in there, see if it does anything at all. Yep. The sucker runs, just needs some fuel. Okay, well, we know the mission. Not spark plug related, not compression related. I can deal with that. Well, I think this thing is dirty enough in general and of a sufficient vintage that it makes sense just to go ahead and pull this carb out, clean it up really good, and see what's needed for a little better anti-vibe. And at the same time, I can really deal with that fuel pickup hose and anything else I find. So time to tear down a little bit and then clean up a lot. Air filter housing comes off, and here's your cute little carb. Pretty simple, looks like. Doesn't even have a choke on it. Of course, the choke is achieved by means of covering up the intake. Yeah, so no gasket in between the carb and the adapter plate. I'm gonna have to read up on this little flap over here. But yeah, we're missing a gasket. Potentially that is it. Yeah, it's got marks on, you can see the impression on the back of it. Matches the opening there on that side of the intake. So yeah, this gasket used to be here. So I need to find another gasket like this. It's a Walbro WA82A. And another part of it says B4. Let's explore a little bit more before I clean up that carb. I like this, it has the dogs on the cover. It's kind of cool. Oh, what do I always do? Forgot to take off the chain brake. All right, this looks a lot like the 257, 262 cover, except it extends farther back here. And the dual element clutch like the 257. Let's go ahead and take the starter off. It needs a good cleaning, maybe some lubrication. I don't know if it's because I was just hitting it on the wrong part of the stroke, or if I was actually maybe catching something in the starter that didn't want to turn easily. But you know, you saw it, like the whole saw would come with me rather than turning over. Nice and dirty in there. Not the self-retaining screws like on some of the newer models. What is the age of this saw anyways? Bottom line starts with 04 380 2935. So I'm thinking it might be 2004, or else the 967 might be 1999. I'll have to go figure out how to read this era of serial plate. Okay. Well, I've definitely got some things I can go and scrub on now. I was looking to see what gaskets I might need, and in so doing, I took off this little kind of intake block-off plate that allows the air injection to stay in the intake air filter area. In any case, it has a rubber connector, kind of like a boot, to the intake side of the cylinder, and it also provides the path for the pulse through this piece right here into the pulse port on the motor. So that's what's going to give a pulse to this point, which makes its way to the carb, which pumps fuel. That's when I saw down inside here, I see something that's lodged down in there. So I'm going to get a pick and see if I can't get that out. That could be the reason we're not pulling fuel from the tank. So maybe that this entire kind of gasket that goes in the pulse port is the problem. Hopefully I can get a new one of these. There we go. Now at least we can see an opening down at the end. Still some debris in there, but once I pull that out, it should be clear. Then it's just a matter of finding out if I can get a replacement. Well, my carburetor kits came in the mail, so I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this carb. I probably could have gotten away with just taking it apart and cleaning it. It looked pretty good inside, but I might as well rebuild it just to remove any doubt. By the way, this is a Walbro 82A, so I'm not sure if that's the original on this Husky 55 or if that's a common carb or not, or maybe it's just one of the many. But that's the one I've got. I'm going to rebuild it now and won't have to worry about any mysteries there. Well, these carburetor kits come with a lot of extra parts you won't end up using. What I do is line up the old parts with the corresponding parts from the kit that I'm going to use, and then this is all the stuff I'm not going to use. There's Welch plugs and a needle that won't fit my carb, and there's a screen here I could use, but I don't need to in my case. Some extra parts that just don't apply to my carb. So these things, are meant to fit multiple different carburetors. Just pick out the parts that you want. One part that I may keep too is the spring for the needle, and that's because the new spring, it just looks like a different dimension. It looks like it would bind up where the first one wouldn't. So you got to kind of make a decision part by part, but putting it on a white towel sure helps so you can see all the little parts. The clean carb I put away in a clean food container along with the parts that I removed just until I verify that everything works properly. That way I can seal this up, not get any contamination inside that nice clean carb. Well, there's that annoying lull on any project where you take it apart, figure out what it needs, then you order parts and have to wait for them to show up. I'm happy to say that day is here. So I've got the 105 link Oregon chain for that 32-inch bar, new exhaust gasket, as well as the support bracket, which I didn't have before. I actually got a whole new exhaust muffler. The reason being I was hoping this would be one of the ones that just sort of falls apart and is held together with the bolts to go through it. This one seems like it's soldered or welded or pinned or clipped or crimped, just like the stock muffler that was on there. So it's not any better in that respect, but I think I have another plan for maybe doing a bit of a muffler mod on that. Got the intake gasket I needed, the oil plug, and the anti-vibration buffer. So I'm excited to start putting this stuff back together. Well, I couldn't find any fuel hose or anything to use to replace this intake pulse port gasket, we'll call it, but I did get rid of the little chunk that was blocking flow and cleaned up the original. I think it's actually going to work okay, but we'll find out pretty quickly. Intake is reattached and the air filter housing is installed along with the clean carb and the new carb gasket critically. Whoops, I forgot to install the throttle linkage. It sneaks underneath the air filter housing, but you cannot install it later on. You've got to attach it to the carb when you're installing the air filter housing and attach it all together at once so that it slides freely underneath there. And the muffler's reinstalled. This is the original muffler fresh out of a bucket of evaporust. I was able to get it reinstalled with the brace that came with the new muffler. Still have plans for that out in the future. On the tank, we've got a brand new fuel pickup filter here, new fuel line to replace this old hardened dry one. I'm going to keep it a little bit long just for now. I'm going to give it an extra wind so that it's still in a tighter position when the cord is wound all the way in. So to do that, you just let some out and pull it in, give it a manual wind one more time, and now you're closed up at a point where there's still more pressure on the spring. And you can still pull it out all the way, but nice positive return. starter cover is reinstalled, and I've got things mocked up here with the fuel tank and its long fuel line plugged into the carb. The idea is to basically just have this mocked up to try and start it, and then later I'll come back and install all the anti-vibe stuff and button things up. But I'm impatient. I want to see if this thing's going to run. And as I understand it, without the spark plug in there, I should be able to rotate the engine. It'll be really easy. And even though there's no pressure or compression on top, there will still be pressure and vacuum underneath the piston skirt, which should drive that pulse port and pump some fuel out of the tank. So I'll move the camera, see if I can get this thing started. I don't have a choke, unfortunately, but I do have a cheat code. Okay, let's see if I can get some fuel into this car by just giving it some cranks. If my theory is correct, that should have pumped some fuel into the carb though. So now let's go ahead and give it a try for real. Remember, I don't have it choked, so I wouldn't expect, and it's kind of cold out, probably 40, 45 degrees, so I wouldn't expect it to want to fire right up, but this should slowly put some heat into it. Let's give it a little bit of help. All right, put a little bit more. I don't want to do a ton of this because obviously there's no lubrication in it. Seems to only be running as long as there's starting fluid in there. Maybe I'm just not getting any fuel still. I've been trying to figure out why I'm not getting any fuel, and to do that, I've done a couple things to help. First is I replaced this fuel line with a clear line, and I assembled everything together to actually try and go ahead and start it, and I saw no fuel actually being pulled through this line, so that's obviously a problem. So the line connects to the pumping side of the carb, if you will, and I've reinstalled everything except for this other side, which is called the metering side of the carb. It has this diaphragm and gasket and cover, and that diaphragm gets sucked down and it operates this mechanism, which in turn pulls open the needle. So there's a seat underneath there and the needle gets pulled up, and that allows fuel to come from the pumping side of the carb up to this side where then it goes into the jets and such. So I want to figure out if fuel is actually getting to this side and figure out if fuel gets here if that needle is down. So I've pulled it a bunch of times with the needle. This would be the closed position by default. Pulled it a bunch of times, no fuel flow. So now what I'm going to do is actually hold that mechanism so that that needle is open and crank it and see if I get any fuel flow. So I'll rig the camera up so that I can try to capture that. So I'm going to try and hold the engine down and also hold down this needle mechanism or manually so that the needle is pulled up out of its seat, and give it some cranks and see if we get any fuel flow. So hopefully that's visible. We can see fuel already made it that far. Let me reposition, give it some more cranks. Okay, cranking again, watching fuel on this hose. There it is. It's completely full. And now we see fuel is transferring from the pumping side on the bottom of the carb up to the top with that needle being open. Lots of fuel flowing through. Well, I know a lot more now. I know that there's nothing wrong with the tank, no venting issues or anything. Fuel does flow out of the hose when it's sucked out of there. I know that the pumping side of the carb is working. That means that the pulse port is lining up and I'm getting pulse from the engine through the gasket. None of that's a problem. And I know that fuel will flow to this side as long as this actually pulls the needle up off of its seat. So there could be a couple things that cause that. It could be that this is just adjusted wrong, or it could be the needle is sticky, or it may even have to do with, the diaphragm that goes up and down and drives this. It could be that this diaphragm is not moving far enough down. There's a lack of vacuum. Lots of things that could be going on, but the important thing is I've gotten a lot further than I was, and I know that it has to do with getting fuel through this needle. So do a little bit more research and figure out what's involved to make all this work. I went and found the spec for how high this part of the mechanism should sit, and Walbro says this should be even with the height of this plate next to it. So I've got a little straight edge here just to help me see where those lie in relation to each other. It looks like it could be a tiny bit low, but it's right there. It's fairly close. So you can actually bend that, and that might be a fix. But I also have a new one of these along with a new needle from the carb rebuild kit. So probably the easiest thing to do is just start by putting those parts in. Okay, I changed out the needle and the arm from the rebuild kit and put it all back together. So now I can test again to see if fuel is being pulled up this line. Oh, there it is. Fuel's moving up the line. At this point, fuel should have made it all the way through the carb and is potentially going into the cylinder. So I guess I could smell for it. Yeah, starting to smell like two-stroke fuel. All right, so time to put things back together, reinsert the original fuel line, and maybe I'll just go ahead and put the whole saw together in the configuration it's actually supposed to be in, and then we'll see if it'll actually run. Okay, put in these 4 new anti-vibe buffers. It's pretty easy on this saw. They're all the same. 2 of them are retained on the flywheel side by the starter, which has these little parts that index into the buffers, and that retains those on that side. And then on the other side, 2 more buffers, and these are retained by a couple covers. So just a cover in the back here, and then this would be the what do you call it, the anti-chain wrap. Can't put them in yet. I need to place the tank, then insert these. I need to run the fuel line through the back. We'll grommet there, get it in there like that, pull that fuel line up. Okay, so fuel line is routed through, everything's lined up. So now put some buffers in. Flywheel side. All right, flip it over, 2 more. So I'll use these ones to actually hold it all together. I really love the construction of this saw. Things are just kind of simple and I don't know, almost like multifunctional. It just seems like they really thought out how this would go together. Very easy to work on, and everything sort of makes sense. No doubt the newer anti-vibration tech is more advanced. Probably works better with this one. It's just so simple, so easy to assemble. So now I can deal with this extra long fuel line. It just needs to wrap around here and go to the carb. It doesn't need to be nearly as long as it is, so I'm going to trim that off. Okay, fuel hose is shortened and connected to the carb. It's still probably longer than I need it, but that's okay. It's always easy to shorten later. What's left? Oh, I need to change out this cap for the oil tank. I got a new one of those. So here's a new OEM cap. All that matters is, does it leak? And it looks like it's going to stop that problem, so I'm happy. And I get to disassemble the intake one more time to install this clip onto here. This is one of the clips that receives a screw from the top cover. Okay, decompression is in. We're set to run. Nothing left to do but just to try it. I'm seeing little puffs of smoke. Hey, that's a good sign. Well, this clutch doesn't sound great, but I was really surprised how snappy that was. It came right up off idle really quickly. Put some hearing protection in and get back at it. Let's see if it'll start with the settings I've got it on now. Well, it seems to be running pretty good. I've got more plans for this saw, including a muffler mod, adapting a great big 32-inch bar so I don't have to lean over, and restoring the white top. So look for those videos soon. If you found this interesting, hit that like button, and thanks for watching.